Welcome back here today on the beautiful campus of Florida Panhandle Technical College. Another in our series of community affairs. Here today with Cathy Pope from Feeding the Gulf Coast, as well as James Guy. If you're a regular viewer of the show, you've certainly seen James in many purviews, with wearing many hats. Most recently as the coordinator of some of our local food giveaways. When we come back, we're going to talk to Cathy and James about our need, in our case, right here in Washington County, where we find ourselves today, but certainly across America, for food. When I first learned about the backpack program, and I found out that these children are being sent home with a backpack full of food, and more importantly, taught to hide it from their parents and their siblings, and so that they can last until Monday when they can come back and get another hot meal, it really tugged at our heartstrings. And I think you've heard the story if you're a regular viewer of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk to Cathy Pope about Feeding the Gulf Coast, Feeding America, what used to be called Bay Area Food Bank. At one time, several years ago, we had Bay Area Food Bank on the show. Talk to them about it. We're going to find out basically an updated version of what's going on today. More importantly, how you can get involved, how you should be paying attention to this. And certainly, if you've got anybody in your extended family, and that includes anybody who lives in your community, who may be in need, how we may be able to help them in their food needs. We'll be right back. Welcome back. As mentioned, our guest today is Cathy Pope from Feeding the Gulf Coast, and James Guy, he needs no introduction.
Nope.
James most notably helps out or coordinates the USDA food giveaways, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Cathy, thanks for taking the time. You're from Milton, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Suzanne, and I can't think of her last name.
Roland.
Suzanne Roland, along with one of her coworkers, was on the show several years ago now, way too long. I think a year or so ago, I actually sent her an email. I handle the programs for Kiwanis, so every week of the year, every Tuesday, I have to come up with a program. So I sent her an email, knowing she was that far away, but saying, if there's some way that you can come this way. She said, love to, we'll coordinate. In the meantime, James mentioned that you were going to be here in the county at some point. Interestingly, we got an email from one of our county commissioners, in front of whom you spoke when I guess you spoke to our county commission. Recently, we got some similar notes from our school district school board. You spoke in front of them. James came to me and said, I think I contacted James and said, hey, listen, Trey Hawkins, who's one of our county commissioners who heard you at the county commission meeting, I said, James, can you help me out? He said, absolutely, and that's all I had to do. James has a passion for this.
He does.
Speaking to you just for a few moments in the pre-show, I already know that you do as well. Let's start at the very beginning. Before we even talk about the name of the organization, the name change, any of that infrastructure, let's talk about need. Mm-hmm. Way too many people, children especially, go to bed right in our own neighborhoods, hungry, and we don't even know it.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that problem right now, Cathy.
Well, hunger in America is a huge problem, and for people like us, like you said, we probably had dinner last night and didn't worry about what we were going to eat this morning. But so many people are struggling financially. They're having to make really tough choices in their household. They have to buy medicine. They had the car break down. They've lost their job. There are just reasons that people are struggling. And one thing they're having to do is make that choice of paying the light bill or buying food. And 1 in 6 of Americans are struggling with hunger, meaning they don't know where their next meal is going to come from.
Let me stop you right there for just a second. 1 in 6.
1 in 6 individuals.
There's 3 of us in the room here. If there were another 3, the odds would be in favor of one of those people being in that situation.
Yes.
Do we know this? I know you know it. It's your business. It's what you're paid to work within. James knows it. He's in the food distribution business. Do we as a society, do we really know it? And is it underscored often enough to get our attention?
It isn't. We kind of ignore it as a people, really, because it's really, we can't even imagine. We go to the grocery store and we see a lot of food, and we really can't even imagine what those households are going through. Now, I said 1 in 6 Americans, but 1 in 4 children. So that's huge numbers of children. And you had mentioned, I think, the backpacks. A lot of children are going home from school. Now they get free or reduced breakfast and lunch in most of the schools. And then they go home on the weekend and they just don't have food provided for whatever reason. And so then they come back to school Monday and they're starving. So that's where the backpack is really important.
And the bigger problem there when they come back and they're hungry is that they're not going to do well academically.
You can't learn if you're hungry. You can't focus, you know.
Right.
So we're, as a society, yes, we're very concerned about education, and we want early childhood education, and we pour dollars into that. But a child is not going to be able to learn, focus, and study and pay attention if he's hungry. So a large part of what we need to do is make sure that that child is fed. And the backpack program helps with that. That is a privately funded mission, but and one of which, Feeding the Gulf Coast, we do quite a bit. I think I told you earlier, Feeding the Gulf Coast, formerly Bay Area Food Bank, handles 24 counties, 8 in South Mississippi, 9 in South Alabama, and 7 in the Panhandle of Florida. So we go all the way to Bay County here in Florida. And we've kind of got it down to a science. We know how to run a backpack program. We just need someone to be the sponsor. And that really makes a difference in the life of a child.
Yeah, and where to go from here? So many different paths to take. We have a working relationship with a lady in Jackson County, right to our east, who is heavily involved in that backpack program. I know here in Washington County, we've had a backpack program in the past. It's come and gone. James, talk a little bit about when we did have it and how long it's been roughly since we've not had it, and more importantly, why?
It ended here a year and a half ago, and when I came on board with it with Suzanne, we had an anonymous donor at the food bank from Washington County donate enough money to do 1 year's backpack program, and it was a citizen of Washington County. So we instituted it with that monies that had already been donated. The next year, I actually made the presentation to Kiwanis and others, and I raised enough money for another year, and I believe it's around $150 per child, if that figure is correct. Okay.
Well, the more important number to me would be how much would it take to successfully run a backpack program for an entire year, in our case in Washington County, roughly?
A year and a half ago, we do 2 schools, the elementary school at Kate Smith, the elementary school in Vernon. It ran approximately 56 children between both schools at $150 per child. So it would approximately take $7,500 to $8,000 per year.
So for under $10,000,
yes,
we can ensure that at least those whom we have recognized or identified as being needy, as being hungry, for as little as $10,000.
Yes.
We can take. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I'm a Baptist by faith. I attend church. I fully support all of those things that the church does that are Bible-believing, one of which is missionaries. And I understand why we go overseas. A young lady in our church was just came back from China, getting ready to go back. I get that. Part of me still says, why are we going elsewhere when literally, in our case, Washington County is not that big?
The need is so great, yes.
Yeah. Cathy, let's talk about the name, because people get confused sometimes. Feeding America was the umbrella organization, or still is the organization. Talk a little bit about that infrastructure and how that works and how it percolates down to a local level such as ours.
Okay, and I want to preface this by telling you I'm the new president and CEO. I've been here 5 months. Dave Rainey, the guy that I replaced, retired, did an amazing job, worked there for 16 years. I have been in food insecurity. I came from Georgia, Meals on Wheels program, so seniors and rural is my heart, but children, obviously, it's more the very delicate populations, the ones who are struggling the most, obviously. Feeding America is our nationwide network of hunger relief, and we have food banks. 200 under Feeding America umbrella are 200 food banks that cover the United States. So every county in our country is represented by a food bank. So I handle the 7 counties in the Panhandle of Florida, and then to the east of me, another food bank will take care of those counties.
And what is our actual food bank here in Washington County?
Feeding the Gulf Coast. We are the ones for Washington County, under the umbrella of Feeding America. Now, there are agencies here, like James has an agency that works through us. So what James will do is work through us to get food delivered to him from our Milton warehouse, and then he has his food distributions, whatever hours. And there are 4 other agencies that we work with in Washington County that do the same thing.
So that's why, and in me in this case, many people would be a little confused because they know that if somebody's in need, they send them to Care and Share Food Pantry, for instance, here. That's the name they know.
Yes.
It happens to be at a church. It happens to be at an organization. But the mystery, if you will, the unknown comes in with that Feeding the Gulf Coast. Before we go any farther, talk a little bit about Cathy Pope, your history and heritage and how you got involved in what you are now.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Georgia and worked in different nonprofits there. I'm very passionate about helping those that really need some help and don't have a voice, and I feel like I'm strong enough to give that voice. Raised 4 children of my own in Georgia, and worked for the Meals on Wheels Association in Macon, Georgia. And when my last child left for college, I thought, this is a big world out there. I might see if something else is coming up.
You got a raise and lots more time.
I did. And so this Feeding the Gulf Coast job was available. I applied, and I started the 1st of September of 2016. I have a MBA from Texas Christian University that I got way back, and a Master's of Arts in Political Science. I'm very interested in policy and advocacy. I want to advocate for the hunger issue. So all of that kind of fit together to be a perfect fit for me for this job. And I'm in Mobile, Alabama. That's my home office, and we have a warehouse in Theodore, Alabama. So that's where I go every day if I'm not traveling around. But in these 5 months, one of the things I've loved the most is talking to the different counties. I have 24 counties, and I'm not through them all yet. But when I did come to Washington County, I'm telling you, the people were so warm to me. And I spoke at the county commissioners meeting, and I had probably 5 people come up to me and introduce themselves, and I'd love to see how I can help. And so a lot of compassion in this county. And I think what I would like to do is basically just educate people to know what we do and how we can serve your county. We want to. One of my missions is, because seniors and rural and children are my heart, we're really branching out to make sure that all of our counties know the service we provide and how we can partner to help those that are struggling with hunger in your community. So that's really what I would like to do.
We expect to see need in the southern part of Mississippi, as well as the southern part of Alabama, frankly. Not too many years ago, we had what we called a perfect storm. We had the oil spill. We had a series of hurricanes and really bad weather, and then we had the bubble burst. So economically, those areas, historically very poor areas, or containing some poor areas anyway, were just triple whammied. They were hit every which way, still haven't recovered to some great extent. Interestingly, as you go from southern Mississippi and into New Orleans even, you still see a lot of blue tarps, and some of that is self-motivation, and we won't get into that part of it, but a lot of it is simply need. That said, when you come over here into the Florida Panhandle, we have a huge tourism industry along the coast. That affects the entire state. It certainly affects our county. People say, well, you're miles from the coast. Many of our people every single day drive to the beaches to work in the hospitality industry, the service industry, whatever it happens to be. So those things are all affected.
Right.
So when you get over here, you don't expect to see that kind of blatant need. And frankly, up until the time we had somebody come, and I think it was at one of our Kiwanis meetings, and talk to us about that need and the reason for the backpack program, I was a Pollyanna. I'm old enough to have my eyes open and know pretty much the ways of the world, but I'm still amazed that things amaze me as much as they do, this being one of them. James says $10,000 to feed what our immediate needs are, or what they were at least a couple of years ago here in Washington County. What are your needs, and how are you working to achieve those? I would imagine money being a big thing. Coordinating with USDA, you get a lot of the government cheeses type foods, and then that's just the term that's been used. Talk a little bit about what your needs are, and again, what you do to get those, so that, realizing you're new, but going forward, if we have you come on the show next year or 2 years from this time, you'll be able to say, this is what I've learned and this is what I've been able to do. And we're not going to talk about maybe what you look to do, because obviously you're still probably getting your feet under you, especially if you haven't visited every county.
Yeah.
What are your immediate needs, and how can, for instance, you're coming to talk to Kiwanis today. What could we possibly do to help?
Well, some of the needs are huge. Like you said, this is a big organization, and we run those trucks a lot. I have a fleet of vehicles that the maintenance is getting a little tough for us. So some of the need is we just need vehicles. So I have to be very smart about how do I replace these trucks, and they're all high ticket items, but that's a big part of what we need to make our business run, because we are something that was really a game changer for Feeding America years ago was store level pickup. So we have agreements, Feeding America and then us through Feeding America, with like Walmart, Publix, Winn-Dixie's. So we do store level pickup. So 5-7 years ago, a lot of stuff that the stores had that they no longer could sell would have gone to our city dumps. But we're recovering that food. And not that all of it is edible, but a lot of it is fine. But the grocery stores, they're going to let that stuff get off the shelf before the date is an expiration date, the can's a tiny bit dented. You go in a grocery store and everything's perfect.
Sure.
And so we're able to recover that. So about 60% of the food we have is store level pickup. So that was really a game changer. And
to interrupt you again there, I know James in the past has mentioned going to Walmart, picking stuff up for his local food giveaways. Does that eliminate that need for that central warehousing so that you can use some of it on demand when you're getting ready to do a giveaway?
Absolutely. So that's huge if we have an approved agency. And again, because we're USDA, because we're Feeding America, we have compliance, that we have to abide by. So I'm a rule follower, so I'm like, well, this is right up my alley. So, but we have to be in compliance with things. So you have to be an agency like James that, obviously you're going to do it right. You're safe with the food. You can maintain that safe temperature. All of those things are important when you're handling food. But yes, that's big. If someone can pick up from the store and then it's not going through us, of course, that's very helpful. But we still pick up a lot. So we do the whole food sorting. And so that's a large part of what we do. But we also get USD products. And you had mentioned whatever block cheese or whatever, we get wonderful blueberries. It's whatever the USDA is, they're regulating all of the agricultural output, but really fabulous food.
So if it's not pretty enough to be on the grocery shelf, it doesn't mean it's not edible.
Doesn't mean it isn't edible.
And so much of that, like you say, either gets thrown away, goes to waste, goes to livestock, in many cases.
Yes.
You're actually able to glean a lot of good out of that.
Yes. Very labor intensive, and that's where a lot of volunteers come in at both warehouses. We have a main warehouse in Theodore and then the main one in Milton that handles the panhandle. So that's a large part of it is recouping that food, which I'm very proud of the fact that we're keeping it out of our landfills. I think that's a huge thing for the environment as well, and we don't really talk about that very much. But I think that's a big plus. And then we have, and again, so USDA sends some, and so we try to get a variety of what we have. We have the frozen meat, the breads. We're in Florida. We're very, it's very positive for us in this community because we get the fresh produce from Florida, which I don't really have access to in Mississippi and Alabama. But we're doing great with getting the produce from South and Mid-Florida up here to the Panhandle.
Specifically Florida, does that have something to do with your relationship maybe with Adam Putnam and the Department of Agriculture in Florida?
Absolutely. It's through the Feeding Florida is our food bank network in Florida. So we have 14 food banks in Florida, and we're one of them. And then Second Harvest of the Big Bend, for example. So Robin is our new executive director for that Feeding Florida, and she's amazing. Used to work for Commissioner Putnam, and I've met him, and he absolutely knows what we're trying to do to get more fresh produce and vegetables into the homes that we're serving in Florida. And so I can see over the next year or two, we're really going to expand that program.
Adam is a great guy. We had the fortune of working with him early on in his career, and many are touting him as potentially the next governor. Of Florida. We are fortunate to have a guy who is from an agricultural background. Many people don't realize the depth and breadth of agriculture. Not so much in Washington County, or there's a lot of it, but to our east, Jackson County, it's huge. It's one of the most prolific or robust agricultural communities around. People don't realize that.
Yeah.
When you're in Panama City Beach, we lived there for 30 years before we moved up here 10 years ago. You're sort of in an insulated, isolated bubble, and you don't know much about what's going on around you. Shame on us now for not telling those people from whence we came, what's going on.
Yeah.
So you talk about your needs. Are you government funded to some extent?
The way that we are government funded is through the summer feeding and after school program. We are reimbursed per meal. And we don't have summer feeding and after school, in every school of the 24 counties by any stretch. I would love that. That's kind of a pie in the sky goal, because there is a huge need for summer feeding in our schools and after schools. And
excuse me to interrupt. If I don't say it now, I'll forget. James had a summer feeding program in Wausau, and they discontinued it because of lack of interest. Yet people just didn't come, didn't show up. Are we seeing that elsewhere, or is that can't be just unique to our area?
Well, unfortunately, a large part of that summer feeding and after school is in the more urban area, like Mobile County in Alabama.
And are they doing well? Do they have attendance there?
Oh, huge.
Okay.
These are kids that are coming to the Boys and Girls Club, after school.
And they don't have to come far.
And right.
Yeah.
Obviously, transportation, is a problem. And I think for the rural, and one of the things that we do that I really love is we do mobile pantries, and James has sponsored some of those. The mobile pantries we put enough food on a truck that feeds 100 families, and then we take it to a community. It could be a community center, it could be James's facility, it could be City Hall, whatever. And then those families know ahead of time that they're going to come and pick up a box of food. So, and we're able to do that really cheaper than anybody could possibly put together the amount of food that we're putting together. It's about 4,000 to 5,000 pounds for 100 families, and it's good stuff. You can make meals off of it. So I'm very happy about that. So I really want to be able to expand that, because just like you said, if they're not able to come into town, we need to be out there in the rural communities, and mobile pantries is a good way to do it. And so that's another way the community can help, is to sponsor a mobile pantry. You've got to have some volunteer help ahead of time, but we do everything. We put it together, we get it out, on the truck and deliver it. And I actually I went to a mobile pantry a few months ago. It was on a Saturday. It was cold that day, very windy, and it was in Foley, Alabama. Just very organized, had lots of volunteers, and cars were lined up. You can't imagine. And it was before Christmas, so, a great time to be serving these families in need. So that's one way that we get the food out to the rural.
James, as I mentioned earlier, we've had the pleasure, we've had the fortune of to be attending your food giveaways.
Yes.
At some points. You've done them in Wausau, you've done them in Chipley, you've done them all around. You expressed in the past some frustrations with the red tape involved. All you want to do, and I know personally that you don't make a penny off of this stuff, and it takes a huge number of volunteers, and in many cases you end up being the bad guy because you ask these people, you have to keep going back to that same well for volunteers. But you're fortunate you're associated with your church,
yes.
And so you have a huge number of volunteers that are there for the right reason. But in the past you've expressed frustration dealing with that governmental red tape. You seem to indicate that things got better under this new purview.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. Talk about that relationship with what was the Bay Area Food Bank, now Feeding the Gulf Coast. Obviously, Cathy, brand new for all practical purposes. But talk a little bit about that relationship and how that has facilitated, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, which is so that people don't go to bed hungry.
Years ago, I had a food bank here 12 years ago. The paperwork, the red tape was so enormous. You spent 90% of your time filling out forms and telling people why you did this and that. And I could not get any volunteers. So we dismissed it. But when approached about 6 years ago, back with Bayer Food Bank, they had streamlined that an enormous amount, and they started having schooling for the entities such as myself. We went, and we go every year, twice a year, to be trained on the new regulations, the new laws. And most people are afraid of paperwork. Well, I'm not afraid of paperwork. So even with mobile pantries, here last year we did 17 in our county. And the year before we did 21. I've actually got 7 organized this year already. Matter of fact, the Methodist Church here in Chipley, we'll be having another mobile pantry there on April the 8th on a Saturday morning. And they are really, really good about doing it. But we need more. We need more people. It's $750, and even though they say it feeds 100 people, 100 families rather. We try to subsidize that out of our food bank with 3,000 or 4,000 more pounds that I collect, so we can feed up to 150 households with the amount of food that we have at those. So all we need is people who, and you say, how will I do that? I'm actually authorized to schedule it. All they have to do is call me. When the truck comes, they'll have a check written out to Feeding the Gulf Coast, and they give it to the driver. The money never comes through me, it goes straight to them. And we just have a great ability now. We've got another one scheduled for Greenhead. I'm scheduling one for Ebro, which is on the other end of the county, here around July. So we need churches, any entity that wants to help. And a lot of people ask me, said, but what about all of those people who should be at work but don't work? I really don't want to help those. 98% of the people who come through our lines are elderly. And, that's a pretty good percentage. If I got to feed 2% of people who are just lazy, who don't want to work, then that's good. Hey, that's a good rate, I think.
Well, frankly, in my world, if 50% of them were there for the wrong reason, it doesn't matter. The other 50% of the ones.
That's correct.
If you're helping,
that's
you're helping
correct.
one person.
That's correct.
We're talking to Cathy Pope from Feeding the Gulf Coast and James Guy from Shepherd's Gate Church. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can get involved. This is the beginning, hopefully, of a new, or at least a resurgence in our backpack program, something which is desperately needed. We're going to talk a little bit more to James about his upcoming food giveaways, and Cathy about what her immediate needs are and how maybe you can get involved. We'll be right back.